Welcome to another edition of the Legacy Warriors podcast. This week, we are covering Cage Warriors 194, and is the first of a doubleheader, as we actually have LFA going down on pretty much at the same time because they're making their debut in Spain, but I won't be dropping that breakdown until about Friday afternoon. So you have to bear with me in terms of the amount of breakdowns I'm going to be doing this week, not just with the UFC Perth event going down on Saturday night, but we also have PFL Europe going down on Friday morning. Dropped that breakdown yesterday. We got PFL MENA going down Saturday morning. I'll only have written breakdowns for that on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, so make sure you guys check that out. And then obviously we got Cage Warriors Saturday morning. We got LFA Saturday morning, PFL MENA, as I just said, Saturday morning, and then UFC Perth on Saturday night. So a ton of mixed martial arts for your boy to get through. So I'm just taking my time, giving every single matchup and every card the care and due that it deserves, so I can give you guys as much information and hopefully help you guys cash some tickets come this weekend. Remember, you guys can listen to this podcast and try to figure out which spots I'm taking shots on, or just check out the MMA LOT and Patreon page, and you can find all of my track plays there, all my predictions there. Pretty much, you can cheat off the test and just get straight to the point there. So there's that option as well. All right. I believe there's 15 fights scheduled for this Cage Warriors 194 card that goes down in Dublin. Obviously, a ton of Irish prospects sprinkled out throughout the card, including in the main event where we have Leon Hill, who was originally scheduled to face, Luan Duarte, I believe it was a Brazilian prospect. Duarte forced to pull out an in-step Samuel Blasco, veteran from Spain, 14-16 record overall. Exciting fighter. But obviously, we'll break down that fight when we get deeper into this breakdown here. So I'll be pretty brief with these breakdowns, getting right to the point for a lot of these fights, just for the sake of time, so I can get to studying on the LFA card. All right, we start off with a pretty fun fight right away, as we have Kenny Mokhonoana coming in at -120, going up against Damon Donald, who comes in at +100. Now, Mokhonoana is riding a 3-fight losing streak at this moment in time, and a lot of those losses came against grapple-heavy fighters, but he finally gets somebody that's going to be willing to strike with him, which is often where Mokhonoana shines in his fights. He started off his career 5-0, but he did have 4 submissions in those 5 wins, showing that he does have a sneaky submission game as long as he's not forced to fully fight off his back against stronger wrestlers. On the feet, he's very clean, very smooth with the straight shots down the pipe, and then obviously can threaten with a lot of chokes when he hurts his opponents. He's going up against Damon Donald, who had a very abysmal amateur run at 8-7, but did blast off to a 3-0 start as a pro. Where we were able to cash a couple good spots on him against Michel Martignoni and then Callum Parker as well. But then he came up short against Christian Soda last time around, where he was unable to deal with the speed, power, and even the physicality of Soda, because Donald is most effective when he can actually get off on his strikes from range, throw with combinations, and throw with solid volume as well. Luckily for Mokhonoana, like I said, he's not fighting a grapple-heavy fighter here, so we should be able to see him showcase the potential and talent that we saw from him during his 5-fight winning streak to start his career, and I think that ultimately allows him to touch up Donald here and eventually either find that submission with a club and sub or outpointing him and winning this fight on the scorecards, but I do like Mokhonoana at -120. Next up, we got Emir Darcy coming in at -450, going up against Justina Kulinska, who comes in at +350. We're getting a huge discount here on Darcy, who was -1,500 last time around, but she ended up fumbling the bag against the BJJ brown belt. I had some interest in that opponent that night, but I thought the physicality and striking advantage of Darcy would allow her to be safe enough in that matchup, but she ended up getting clubbed and subbed in the second round of that fight after a pretty good first round. She's a slugger at heart. She's very physical and, very strong, but it's clear that she needs to improve the grappling aspects of her game if she hopes to make it to the next level. Luckily for her, she's going up against a Tomato level fighter here who went 2-3 as an amateur and lost her lone pro fight back in June, where she was outgrinded and eventually submitted at the ending of the first round. I think Kulinska will likely look to take that grappling approach here against Darcy, but she's not as good, nor is she a BJJ brown belt the way that Darcy's last opponent was. Thus, I expect Darcy to go out there and just put a barrage of shots together here that Kulinska is not going to be able to take, and that should give us another classic Darcy performance. And dare I say, at minus 450, I think that is a steal of a line here for Darcy to get back to her winning ways. Next up, we got Trevor Makengo coming in at plus 110, going up against Norbert Pietrzak, who comes in at minus 130. Now, Makengo didn't really seem to take his amateur MMA career all that seriously, considering he was fighting at heavyweight the entire time, and it was clear he was out of shape. He tried to utilize his physicality in the clinch against a lot of his opponents, and it didn't work out all that often. He has some decent striking, but we did see him slowly start to get into shape for his pro debut that he had last year, and we saw a little bit better pop on his shots, a little bit better movement and combinations. But now at 205 pounds for sure, it would be interesting to see what that body transformation and what that lifestyle transformation will help him in terms of his mixed martial arts career. Fortunately for him, he's going up against a very tough Norbert Pietrzak, who went 5-0 as an amateur. He did have a no contest there against Nel Ariano, who is a Cage Warriors prospect, and that fight was stopped in the second round due to an unintentional headbutt from Nel that caused a bad cut and swelling on the eye of Pietrzak. Pietrzak is a Muay Thai specialist who spent some time down there at Tiger Muay Thai, but it seems like he's set up his roots in Scotland now, where he's been doing a great job in terms of getting some good training partners, some good coaches, and really rounding out the rest of his game. He's very big, strong, physical, and a nasty striker. And I look forward to the fact that he can finally utilize knees to its fullest extent and elbows as a professional MMA fighter. At the current line, I feel like Pietrzak is the side. He looks much cleaner as a striker. It seems like he's strong enough to thwart any type of grappling that Makengo might be throwing at him here. And then when they tie up in the clinch, I expect Pietrzak to be the better striker, especially with his knees and elbows up the middle. Unless there's something I'm missing, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on the Pietrzak side in case there is something that I'm missing. But I feel like he is the side here, especially at minus 130, and I wouldn't mind taking him here to TKO Makengo, probably with some body work as he wears Makengo down and wins this fight in the second or third round. Next up, we got Jamie Abbott-Bissett coming in at minus 500, going up against Matthew Friel, who comes in at plus 375. Now, Bissett is 2-0 as a pro now, but actually went 8-10 as an amateur. There's nothing special from the amateur scene that really made you want to watch him as a pro. It seems like he takes grapple-heavy approaches in a lot of his fights. We saw him utilize his striking in his second round of his pro debut, mainly because he saw that his opponent was starting to show the wear and tear of the grappling success that Bissett had in the first round. Decent, below average striker, a mediocre grappler, and he's going up against a guy similar who, not really doing anything that jumps off the page all that much. Friel has a 1-2 pro record now, but there are some fights that he, probably could have gotten to go his way. The split decision loss that he had against Gary Priestley easily could have been scored in his favor. And then last time around, he had some big moments throughout the fight, but had some control time really work against him there. But he's usually slick with his submission and grappling game, has a decent striking game with the speed and range that he normally shows. But similar to Bissett, he had a very mediocre amateur career where he went 9-1. I'm kind of surprised that Bissett is minus 500 here. Like, there's nothing that jumps off the page that makes me scream to bet him at that number. More so, I actually like the other side. I think Friel has a good enough scramble and submission game to not allow Bissett to have too much, control time from that top position. And then in the striking realm, I think Friel might be able to really disrupt Bissett here and possibly have some success there too. So I like Friel to pull off the upset. And on a card full of chalky favorites that will likely end up coming through, Friel might be one of the more live underdogs to pull off the upset. So I'm going to go Friel here. Plus 375 is a great number. This is a low-level fight all around. Unless Bissett has really turned a corner, similar to a guy like Kieran Clark, who obviously has a very successful pro career after having an abysmal amateur run. But I just don't see anything in Bissett's game that screams that as of yet. So I'm going to go Friel and Friel by a decision. Should be a close fight. Even if Friel ends up losing, I expect him to outperform the plus 375 number on his odds there. All right, next up, we got Joe Doyle coming in at Joe Doyle coming in at plus 475, and Jamie McGowan coming in at minus 700. Doyle had a very tough pro debut, which was actually under the Cage Warriors banner back in April. He took on a very promising Keogh, and Keogh was able to pretty much dominate and submit him within a minute and a half there. Doyle 3-3 as an amateur, with 3 of those wins coming in fights, one of those 3 wins actually coming in a fight that is considered ineligible on the record for Tapology due to the low-level nature of it. It seems like he prefers the grappling game, but he doesn't really jump off the page in terms of somebody that can be super dominant with it. He's going up against McGowan, who's going to have his first MMA fight. That's amateur and pro. First ever MMA fight here after coming from the kickboxing realm. Trains out of the Scottish Hit Squad, I believe it is, but has also been training down at Manchester Top Team to get some different looks. His striking looks clean, crisp, and very powerful, and he seems physical and strong enough to really thwart any type of grappling approach that Doyle will be looking to take here, and I think that will eventually lead to McGowan busting him up on the feet and finding a knockout. But tough to trust a guy that's never stepped foot in the MMA cage as a minus 700 favorite. I still expect McGowan to get the job done here. All right. Next up, we got Gary Rooney coming in at minus 600, going up against Gary Priestley, who comes in at plus 425. Starting off on the Rooney side of things, I was very impressed with his ability to pull off that armbar against Enrico Dagangi last time. I believe that fight was back in May. Showcased some good grappling, good defensive grappling as well, but the swiftness in which he threw up his armbar against Dagangi, who is a skilled grappler in his own right, is very impressive from the BJJ black belt. Rooney went 13-4 as an amateur with 4 submission wins, but now has 2 of his 3 pro wins by submission, showcasing that's usually the path of attack for him. His striking is slowly starting to come together, but it's really his grappling that sets him apart from a lot of his opponents. He's going up against Priestley, who I had as a decent underdog last time around when he made his Cage Warriors debut in April, and unfortunately repeated groin kicks saw a point taken away from him, and ultimately that fight being scored a draw. He's a very mobile striker that likes to use a lot of kicks, decent physicality, decent strength, but we've seen guys that look to take him to the ground. They're often able to have success there. He's 2-2-2 with 1 no contest over 7 pro fights, showcasing how mediocre he really is. Rooney shouldn't have too many issues getting this fight to the ground, but the physicality and striking advantage of Priestley gives me a little bit of concern in terms of trusting Rooney at minus 600. I expect Rooney to win. I expect him to get that submission, but again, things could go a little bit sour for him if he can't get that position on the mat to get that finish. So I'll go Rooney by submission, but can't get behind that minus 600 line. All right, next up, we got Ryan Shelley coming in at minus 330, going up against Gabriel Galluccio, who comes in at plus 270. Now, for Shelley, he pulled off a solid upset against Simone Diana last time around, where he got a standing rear naked choke in the second round of their fight. Shelley is mainly known for his Taekwondo background, but the majority of his wins have come by submission, showcasing that he can be very dangerous there if some of the grappling attempts against him are not done with the most thought. He's done a good job in terms of throwing up submissions off of his back, but also sinking in those front chokes when opponents get a little bit too desperate with some of the takedown attempts. At his best, he treads at distance, really picks his opponents apart, and puts together good strikes there until he can open up a finishing opportunity, whether it's with punches or snatching the neck of his opponents and forcing the tap. Now, Galluccio rides a 5-fight winning streak coming into his Cage Warriors debut. And this is a fighter that started off his career 2-2 and then took 4 years away after he went on a 2-fight losing streak. And then since returning in 2023 has pulled off 5 straight victories with 3 finishes in those matchups. He seems to have a mediocre all-around game, a guy that can really extend his ceiling if he starts to perform at this level at a high enough rate. Decent grappling, mediocre striking, showcases good control, some good ground and pound as well. Looks to have a good gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to. And that's where my question marks come in this matchup for Shelley. I think Shelley is the more talented fighter overall, but if he's dealing with a very physical and grapple-heavy approach from Galluccio, Galluccio seems like he might have some good enough takedown defense, or at least a submission defense, to kind of thwart off anything from Shelley there. But again, This will be the toughest test in Galluccio's career, so I can't fully get behind him here. But if this line continues to climb, if he gets into that plus 400, plus 500 range, it's going to be hard to overlook the paths to victory that he has. A lot of it, rooted in that wrestling and that top control, which can be done against Shelley. But I think Shelley will stay active enough. I think he'll cause reversals, submission attempts, manage to get back to his feet and get back to his striking advantage. So I think Shelley ends up either getting his submission or winning this fight on the scorecards. But I can't get behind the minus 330 line. All right, next up, we got Anthony Orozco coming in at minus 1,500, going up against Aldo Pereira, who comes in at plus 850. Now, Orozco was able to pick up his solid and dominant victory over Luan Duarte last time around, where he utilized a grapple-heavy approach to really wear down the Brazilian and grind that fight out to win it on the scorecards. Pereira, on the other hand, pulled off a upset victory over Francesco Mezio, who we know is not that great of a fighter, but Pereira's durability held up early, and he was able to pull away in deep water to win that fight on the scorecards as well. Unfortunately for Pereira, I think he's really upped against it here against Orozco, who showcases solid striking and good power. But if he can't get that finish within the first 2 to 3 minutes, he often relies on his strong wrestling and top control to really smother and wear opponents down so he can win fights on the scorecards. For me, it's tough to always get behind anything above that minus 1,000 line or even anything above minus 800. But I am curious to see what the over will look like here if we get the 1.5 at anything better than minus 150. I think Pereira will be tough to put away, and he'll definitely give Orozco more than he can handle. But I fully expect Orozco to lean on his grappling and his strength to keep Pereira in defensive positions and then grind this fight out to win it on the scorecards, which is why I'd rather go with the over than taking the chalky money line here. Next up, we got Steven Costello coming in at plus 115, going up against Manuel Del Valle, who comes in at minus 135. Now, Costello had a mediocre amateur run, going with a 4-4 record, and now he's 5-3 as a pro as he comes into a short notice Cage Warriors debut. He's faced some decent competition throughout his career for promotions like Bellator, Combache, and most recently Eternal MMA, but he's really lost a lot of those showcase spots. He has some decent back control when he can get the back of his opponents. His striking is not all that bad, has some decent pop on his shots, but he can be outstruck and he can be outgrappled. And he's really going to be facing it here against a pressure fighter like Manuel Del Valle, who I'm now 0-3 in terms of predicting. I picked against him in his first 2 Cage Warriors fights, and he proved me wrong. Then I picked him as a chalky favorite in his last matchup, and he was grinded out in that fight. He had some moments of success, but it was his opponent who was able to threaten with some deep submissions and some decent control time. But normally Del Valle is a fighter that likes to keep forward pressure, rough his opponents up in the clinch, try to take them to the ground, and then apply his jiu-jitsu game, especially with the gangly frame that he has with his arms. I expect him to do that successfully here against Costello, who I think will struggle to keep Del Valle off of him. This could be competitive early, but as Del Valle starts to pick up steam and keep Costello pinned against the cage, I'm sure that will start to translate into some takedowns and some good control time for Del Valle, and that should lead to him either finding a late finish or a decision victory. But at minus 135, I'm more than happy to take a shot on him there. Our next up, we've got Keogh coming in at minus 990, going up against Damian McKenna, who comes in at plus 690. Now, Keogh is a very solid fighter who went 15-1 as an amateur. He's now 3-0 as a pro, 2-0 as a pro. He's finished both of his 2 opponents in the first round. With the submission, I believe within 2 minutes as well. High-level BJJ game. His striking is definitely there as well. He's very clean and crisp with his striking game down the pipe, and he seems to have a good gas tank to go 15 if that's what's required of him. He's going up against McKenna now, who comes into his Cage Warriors debut with a 3-0 record. He submitted all 3 of his opponents, but once you start looking into his amateur career, you can see how low level he actually is. He's pretty much been can-crushing a lot of his opponents. He has mediocre BJJ. He looks like a wizard against a certain level of opponent, but for the most part, when he faces legitimate resistance, he'll end up coming up short. Minus 900 is not at all surprising on Keogh. I expect him to really wear McKenna down, and I think he'll be able to finish him within 1 round. I'll be interested to see what the under 1.5 is like in this matchup. Our next up, we got Conor McCarthy coming in at minus 1,200, going up against Diego Visanzay, who comes in at plus 750. Now, McCarthy improved to 4-0 last time around by outstriking and outpointing Joshua Onwardi and showcasing good takedown defense, which has often been the crux of his game. From there, he lets go with good striking, with in and out movement and good footwork, and he has some very good power in his hands to really cause his opponent some issues. Takedown defense is where he needs to continue improving his game so that he can keep fights in a round where he often has an advantage over his opponents. Visanzay had his 5-fight winning streak snap back in April when he came up short against Chasen Blair, which was a horrible stylistic matchup for him. Visanzay is normally a power puncher who leaves many openings to be countered, but also a very horrible takedown defense game and grappling game, which led to Blair submitting him halfway through that first round. Visanzay may have a better chance of winning this fight than he had the Blair fight, but I still expect him to be behind it here against somebody who I expect to be a far technically superior striker in the form of Conor McCarthy. Minus 1,200 is not a line to really get behind. I'd be curious to see what the under looks like in this matchup, but I expect McCarthy to roll here and eventually find a knockout victory. All right. Next up, we got Adam Darby coming in at minus 400, going up against Robert Alexandru Constantin, who comes in at plus 300. Now, Darby was towering over his last opponent, who he really chipped away at from distance and eventually forced a tap out from his opponent after a head kick landed cleanly near the ending of that second round. Darby is a guy that would normally look to take his opponents to the ground and utilize his lanky frame to apply submissions and force the tap on his opponents. But in recent fights, he's been really leaning on his striking to try to get more experience there so that he can round out his game as he starts to take steps up in competition. His opponent this weekend is a Romanian fighter who has put together a 6-0 record on that scene, which is largely fueled by a takedown-heavy approach, which allows him to get to dominant positions quickly and then get a quick TKO or submission win over his opponents. But I don't think that style is going to work at this level, as guys will be able to counter his reckless striking approach pretty easily and even fend off some of his takedowns, force him into some submissions, or even throw up submissions off their back to catch him. He's a little bit reckless on the ground, and that's where I think he's going to struggle to really contain Darby, who's going to obviously have a height and reach advantage here. And whether Darby looks to apply submissions and get Constantin out that way, or looks to meet him down the pipe with counters and really hurt Constantin on the feet, I think Darby wins this fight relatively easily, and minus 400 may not look that bad once this is all said and done. And next up, we got Jura Harris coming in at minus 250, going up against Johnny Touma, who comes in at plus 210. Now, Harris is a fighter that had a relatively successful amateur career going 8-2, but now has had a bit of a rocky run as a pro with now a 5-3 record. He's in the midst of a 2-fight slump, the first of those losses coming to Joanny Scott, who eventually fought for a title shortly thereafter, and that was a loss by split decision in a fight where there was a lot of scrambles and a lot of position changes, but ultimately it was Scott that was able to grind that fight out and just eke it out. The following loss for Harris was one that he really struggled to get off any success after that first round, as Marcus Ferreira was able to grind him out in the second and third rounds, and Harris was unable to really scramble or get much success of his own. He had a solid first round, but then he really struggled after that. He's a guy that's a well-rounded fighter, some decent striking. I think he's best when he can offensively get to his grappling and maintain that top position, and he normally shows good scrambling and ability to work back to his feet. I think he's going to be able to show that successfully here against Touma, who is now 1-3 over his last 4 fights, and showing that it's really starting to become a struggle to deal with the level of competition he's facing now. Touma has some good power in his hands, has a decent grappling game, but I don't think he has the level of control that's going to cause Harris too much issues here. I still am a little bit skeptical about Harris at minus 250. I think he'll have success in this fight, but he'll have to really evade the big strikes coming back his way from Touma. And then from there, he's going to have to get to his grappling if he hopes to muzzle the game of Touma. I'll go Harris, but I don't want anything to do with him unless he's around that minus 150 range, which I don't think will end up happening by fight time. All right, co-main event time where we got Maximus Lally coming in at minus 700, welcoming back Ben Ellis, who comes in at plus 500. Now, Lally is a high-level Irish prospect that stepped into the Cage Warriors ring for the for the first time last time around after having a successful debut in April. And that night, he utilized solid pressure with his striking, and then a great takedown to eventually set up a beautiful triangle choke to get the tap from his opponent. He is a BJJ brown belt, but his aggressiveness and activity makes him very hard to deal with once he's able to establish top control. He's also 9-0 as an amateur and trains under Paddy Holohan, who is a former UFC flyweight. He's going up against Ben Ellis, who's coming back from a 3-year hiatus where he had to deal with plenty of injuries and issues outside of the cage. But he has faced notable Cage Warriors fighters like Nick Bagley, and then he actually came up short against Nathan Kelly in his PFL debut in his last matchup. He showcases some good striking, good takedown defense, and good defensive grappling. But if you can put a pace and pressure on him, that's where he'll start to show some of the cracks in his game. And that's where I think Lally will start to have success. Tough to trust Lally at -700, as Ellis could have a bit of a striking advantage. And if his takedown defense holds up enough, he might be able to force Lally to strike with him more than Lally would like. But I think with the layoff and with the aggressiveness from Lally, he will be able to get the positions that he needs. And I think that will eventually lead to him getting another submission victory. But I'll pass at -700. All right. Next up, main event, we got Leon Hill going up against Samuel Blasco. Before I started recording this, there were no odds for it as of yet. Let me quickly take a look on BetOnline right now to see if they've actually rectified that issue or not. Give me 1 second here. I'm expecting Hill to be a pretty big favorite anyway, so I'm not going to hamper too much on whether the odds are out here or not. No. He was -500 against Luan Duarte, if that means anything to you guys. But Hill, very solid fighter. He's 4-1 since coming into the Cage Warriors, or at least since I started researching him. His one defeat came against Ewan McKenzie, I believe was the guy's name, or Ewan Davies, who's a very high-level and undefeated fighter still. Hill normally like to utilize his submission game and grappling, but he's really improving his boxing game as of late, and that definitely showed off in his last matchup as well. Blasco, very volatile fighter, similar to Michael Chamu, loves to really put pressure on his opponents early. Either he finishes opponents early or he gasses out and eventually either gets finished or loses a decision. He has won some fights past the first round, but those are against very low-level opposition. Given that he's taking this fight on super short notice, I just don't think he'll be prepared enough to take on a guy like Hill. I think Hill will stay safe enough, whether it's with his distance striking and boxing or grappling. And then I think in the second or third round, he'll eventually find that finish here. So, I'd be okay with taking Hill anywhere up to about -400 as a parlay piece. But outside of that, I'd rather pass than, take any super big chalk or even taking the underdog shot here. So I think Hill probably finishes him within 2 rounds. There you guys go. Cage Warriors 194 broken down for you guys. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about LFA 218, I believe, is the event. So keep your eyes peeled for that breakdown. Again, check out the MMA LOT and Patreon page for all the other stuff that you might be missing out on. Breakdowns, picks, predictions, track plays, degenerate plays, all of that good shit can be found on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below. And I'll actually see you guys later today for the Locky Trinity, Locky 2-step for UFC Perth. See you guys then. Peace.